A beaten leopard couldn't trust humans until one woman's patience saved him. Locked in a cage, scarred by cruel hands, this animal had every reason to hate the world. But when one determined woman looks into his broken eyes, she sees something others don't. A soul fighting to survive. What begins as an act of compassion turns into a battle against power, lies, and danger, far greater than she ever imagined. Behind closed doors, someone is hiding a brutal truth, one that could cost not only the leopard's life, but her own. She's risking everything to save him, but can trust be reborn in the face of betrayal, violence, and fear? And in the end, who will save who? Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The New Mexico sun hung low on the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of amber and rose. Blythe Warwick stood at the fence of her modest wildlife sanctuary, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, watching a rehabilitated hawk take tentative steps toward freedom. The sight would normally fill her with joy, but today her mind was elsewhere. The small sanctuary she built from the ground up was struggling. Bills piled up on her desk, and the medication costs for her current residents ate through what little donations trickled in. Still, Blythe wouldn't trade this work for anything, not even the cushy veterinary practice her parents had hoped she'd pursue. That evening, as she sat at her worn desktop computer updating medical records, a message popped up on her screen. The sender was anonymous, but the video attachment made her breath catch in her throat. The footage showed a magnificent leopard, its golden coat dulled by neglect, pacing in a cramped cage. But it was the angry red welts across its back that made Blythe's hand shake with anger. "Oh no," she whispered, leaning closer to the screen. The big cat's movements were jerky, afraid. Each turn revealed more evidence of abuse, scars both old and new crisscrossing its muscular frame. Through careful pauses of the video and enhancement of background details, Blythe recognized equipment bearing the Pike Safari Ranch logo. Her jaw clenched. Marston Pike's tourist trap was notorious among wildlife rehabilitators, but his political connections made him seemingly untouchable. The next morning, Blythe pulled up to Pike's sprawling compound in her dusty pickup truck. The entrance was designed to impress. Wrought iron gates open to reveal manicured grounds and elaborate safari-style viewing areas. Everything screamed money and influence. Two burly men in security uniforms approached as she parked. "Ma'am, this is private property." Blythe stood her ground, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to speak with Mr. Pike about one of his animals." "Mr. Pike doesn't take unscheduled visitors," one guard started, but a smooth voice cut through the tension. Now, let's not be inhospitable." Marston Pike emerged from the main building, all expensive boots and practiced charm. His silver hair caught the sunlight, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "How can I help you, Miss Warwick?" "Blythe Warwick. I run the wildlife sanctuary in Copper Canyon." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm here about your leopard." Pike's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "My animals receive excellent care, Miss Warwick. Perhaps you'd like a tour. We can discuss your concerns over—" "I've seen the video," Blythe interrupted, pulling out her tablet. The one showing the abuse. Those marks weren't accidents. The charm vanished from Pike's face. "I don't know what amateur footage you think you've seen, but I suggest you leave now." He nodded to his men, who moved to flank Blythe. "That animal needs help," she insisted as they began herding her toward her truck. "This isn't over." Pike's laugh was cold. "I believe it is, Ms. Warwick, and I'd watch those accusations if I were you. Defamation suits can be so costly." The guards practically shoved her into her vehicle. As she drove away, Blythe's hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from fury and frustration. That poor animal's eyes haunted her. There had to be a way to help Dot later that night, after tending to her sanctuary residence evening needs. Blythe trudged up the steps to her small house on the property. Something white caught her eye, an envelope, trapped beneath her welcome mat. Her name was typed on the front, nothing else. Inside, she found 3 things: a veterinary ID tag with numbers and dates, a transport schedule showing upcoming animal movements from Pike's ranch, and a handwritten note. The message was brief but chilling. He won't survive another winter. Blythe sank into her porch chair, documents trembling in her hands. Someone on the inside was reaching out. Someone who knew the truth about the Leopard's condition and the darker side of Pike's operation. The transport schedule showed multiple dates, opportunities when the animal would be vulnerable during transfer. She stared out at the desert night, her sanctuary quiet except for the occasional call of a resident owl. The Leopard's wounded eyes filled her thoughts alongside Pike's threatening smile. The comfortable path would be to turn these documents over to authorities who had consistently looked the other way when it came to Pike's operation. But Blythe hadn't built this sanctuary by taking the comfortable path. She smoothed the papers on her lap, studying the dates with growing determination. That Leopard needed help, and somehow she would find a way to provide it. The warning note made the stakes clear. Time was running out. The metal filing cabinet creaked as Blythe pulled out another form. Her small office at the sanctuary was cramped but organized, with photographs of successfully rehabilitated animals covering one wall. She'd been up since 5 in the morning, meticulously documenting every detail from the disturbing video of the beaten leopard at Pike Safari Ranch. "This is the 3rd report I've filed this week," she muttered, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. The words on her screen blurred together as she detailed the visible wounds, the concerning behavior patterns, and the clear signs of sustained abuse. A knock at her door made her look up. Nico Parr, her dedicated vet tech, stood in the doorway with 2 steaming cups of coffee. His work clothes were already smudged with dirt despite the early hour. "You're going to wear out that keyboard," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. "Any response from the wildlife department?" Blythe rubbed her tired eyes. "The same form letter as before. They're calling it insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Can you believe that? There are literal whip marks visible in the video." "Pike's got friends in high places," Nico said, leaning against the doorframe. "Money talks." As if on cue, Blythe's email pinged. Her face fell as she read the message. "Speaking of Pike, his lawyers just sent a cease and desist letter. They're threatening to sue for defamation if I don't stop filing reports." "He's scared," Nico said firmly. "You're getting too close to the truth." Before Blythe could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the state inspector's office. Her stomach dropped. They weren't due for an inspection for months. "Miss Warwick?" The voice was clipped and official. "This is Inspector Rodriguez. We've received complaints about your facility. I'll be conducting an immediate inspection." 2 hours later, Blythe stood in shocked silence as the inspector wrote up violations she'd never been cited for before. Outdated permit forms that had always been acceptable. Minor fence repairs that had passed previous inspections. Even the medication storage system she'd carefully maintained was suddenly non-compliant. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "Nothing has changed since our last inspection 3 months ago." The inspector didn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, but until these violations are addressed, we'll have to suspend your operations." After he left, Blythe sank into her chair, hands shaking. "This is Pike written all over it." "We'll fight this," Nico insisted, pacing the small office. "We've got documentation of all our previous past inspections." A gentle knock interrupted. Them, Keir Maddox, the state investigator who'd been assigned to review her reports about Pike, stood in the doorway. His clean-cut appearance and pressed uniform contrasted sharply with the sanctuary's rustic setting. "I heard about the inspection," he said carefully. "May I come in?" Blythe nodded, too drained to speak. Maddox sat down, his posture professional, but his eyes sympathetic. "Off the record," he began, "I believe your reports about Pike. The evidence patterns are consistent with abuse. But my hands are tied by regulations and jurisdictional issues. So Pike just gets away with it?" Blythe's voice cracked. "While that poor Leopard suffers." "The Leopard," Maddox said softly. "You seem particularly concerned about this one." Blythe pulled up the video on her computer, freeze-framing on the Leopard's face. Despite the poor quality, the animal's eyes held a haunting intelligence. "Look at his behavior," she explained, pointing to specific moments. "The way he flinches at sudden movements, how he backs into the corner when anyone approaches. These aren't natural behaviors. They're learned responses to abuse. But there's still fight in him, still dignity." She touched the screen gently. "I've been calling him Cedar, like the tree, bent by the storm, but not broken." Maddox watched her carefully. "Naming him makes this personal." "Personal?" "It already was personal," Blythe replied, straightening her shoulders. "Every animal that suffers while people look the other way makes it personal. I don't care what Pike throws at me, lawsuits, inspections, whatever. I'm not giving up on Cedar. You could lose everything," Maddox warned. "I'll lose more if I stay silent." Blythe's voice was quiet but firm. "Cedar deserves someone fighting for him. If the system won't do it, then I will." Nico stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "We will. You're not in this alone, Blythe." Maddox stood, adjusting his uniform. "I need to maintain official neutrality," he said carefully. "But I'll keep your reports active in the system. Sometimes the right paperwork finds its way to the right people." After he left, Blythe turned back to the frozen image of Cedar. The Leopard's golden eyes seemed to look right through the screen, calling to something deep in her soul. "We'll find a way," she whispered. "I promise." The sanctuary around her was quiet, suspended in operation, but Blythe's determination had never been stronger. Cedar's face on her screen reminded her why she'd built this place, not for the easy cases, but for the ones that everyone else had given up on. Pike could throw all the obstacles he wanted in her path. She'd find a way through them, one by one, until Cedar was safe. The metal filing cabinet creaked as Blythe pulled out another form. Her small office at the sanctuary was cramped but organized, with photographs of successfully rehabilitated animals covering one wall. She'd been up since 5 in the morning, meticulously documenting every detail from the disturbing video of the beaten leopard at Pike Safari Ranch. "This is the 3rd report I filed this week," she muttered, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. The words on her screen blurred together as she detailed the visible wounds, the concerning behavior patterns, and the clear signs of sustained abuse. A knock at her door made her look up. Nico Parr, her dedicated vet tech, stood in the doorway, with 2 steaming cups of coffee. His work clothes were already smudged with dirt despite the early hour. "You're going to wear out that keyboard," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. "Any response from the wildlife department?" Blythe shook her head, reaching for the coffee. "The same runaround. They say without direct evidence of current abuse, it can't justify an inspection." She clicked through several tabs on her browser. "Look at this." Nico leaned over her shoulder to see a glossy webpage filled with photos of tourists posing with tiger and leopard cubs at Pike Safari Ranch. The cubs looked drowsy, likely sedated for the photo sessions. $300 per photo session, Blythe said, her voice tight with anger. "But notice how there are never any adult animals in these tourist shots, only cubs. Where do they all go?" Nico asked, though his grim expression suggested he already knew. I've been doing some digging. Blythe pulled up another file. Pike breeds them for the cub photos. Once they're too big to handle safely, around 12 weeks old, they disappear into the back compounds. That's where Cedar is now. A sharp knock at the sanctuary's front door interrupted them. Through the window, Blythe spotted a courier with an official-looking envelope. Her heart sank. She'd been expecting this. The letter inside was printed on government letterhead. Effective immediately. Failure to meet updated facility requirements. Temporary suspension of operations pending review. Blythe's hand shook as she read the words aloud. They can't do this, Nico protested. Our facilities exceed state standards. Pike can make them do whatever he wants, Blythe said quietly. He's got half the county officials in his pocket. Later that afternoon, while sorting through documents for their appeal, Blythe received an unexpected visitor. The young woman introduced herself as Amy Chun, a clerk from the county courthouse. I've been processing Pike's permits for years, Amy said in a low voice, glancing around nervously. The things I've seen, the way he operates isn't right, but nobody wants to challenge him. His lawyers bury complaints in paperwork, and the officials he can't buy, he threatens. Blythe leaned forward. Will you help me? Make a statement? Amy shook her head. I can't. I need this job. But she slid a business card across the desk. Talk to Marcus Webb. He used to drive transport for Pike until last month. He might be willing to tell you what he saw. Marcus Webb proved to be a weathered man in his 50s who met Blythe at a diner 40 miles out of town. His hands trembled slightly as he stirred his coffee. It's a system, he explained. Pike's got it down to a science. Breed the cats. Use the cubs for photos while they're small and cute. Then, he swallowed hard. Then they go to the back compounds. That's where they break them. Break them? Blythe's voice was barely a whisper. Starve them, beat them, whatever it takes to make them submit. The ones that survive become breeding stock. The ones that don't. He didn't finish the sentence. As Blythe drove home that evening, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meeting. Tonight. Old Miller Barn. Come alone. The abandoned barn sat at the edge of a fallow field, its weathered boards silver in the moonlight. Blythe's flashlight beam caught movement in the shadows. Over. Here. A woman's voice called softly. Inez Caro stepped into the light. Blythe recognized Pike's headkeeper from her confrontation at the ranch. The older woman's face was lined with exhaustion and something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I've worked for Pike for 15 years, Inez said without preamble. Kept quiet, did what I was told. Told myself I was protecting the animals by staying. But after what they did to Cedar, she pulled a USB drive from her pocket. I've got ledgers, security footage, everything that shows what really happens in those back compounds. Blythe's heart pounded. Why now? Because Cedar fought back. He wouldn't break, no matter what they did to him. Pike's determined to make an example of him. Inez's voice cracked. I can't watch another one die. Not like this. She pressed the USB drive into Blythe's hand. Be careful who you trust with this. Pike's got eyes everywhere. But use it to shut him down before Cedar runs out of time. As Inez melted back into the darkness, Blythe clutched the drive like a lifeline. For the first time since seeing that first video of Cedar, she felt something beyond despair. Hope, small but fierce, and the certainty that she wasn't fighting alone anymore. The weight of their shared purpose filled Blythe's small office as she spread a map across her desk. Nico, Kier, and Inez huddled around it, their faces tense with concentration. Outside, the New Mexico sun was setting, painting the sanctuary in deep orange hues. The transport happens every second Thursday, Inez said quietly, her weathered finger tracing the route on the map. Pike's men move the older animals out at night, using this back road to avoid attention. Her hand trembled slightly as she marked the spot. After 15 years as Pike's headkeeper, betraying him clearly rattled her. Keir Maddox leaned forward, his state investigator's badge catching the light. "I can initiate a traffic stop here," he indicated a stretch of isolated road. "But my jurisdiction is limited. Once I verify suspicious cargo, I'll need backup from local authorities. Can we trust them?" Blythe asked, remembering how easily Pike had manipulated officials before. "I have contacts in the state police who aren't on Pike's payroll," Keir assured her. "But timing is everything. We'll have maybe 20 minutes before word gets back." To him, Nico ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'll have the medical supplies ready and our emergency transport prepped." "But Blythe," he hesitated. "Cedar's dangerous. You've seen how aggressive he is in that footage." "That's why I need to be the one to handle him," Blythe said firmly. "He's been betrayed by humans his whole life. We need someone who can stay calm and show him patience." Inez nodded. "I'll make sure he's given a lighter sedative dose for transport. Enough to keep him manageable, but alert enough to understand you're helping him." She pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn from use. "I've documented everything. The breeding program, the abuse, the illegal sales. But if Pike realizes I'm involved, he won't," Keir promised. "We'll protect your identity as long as possible." They spent the next hour mapping out contingencies. Nico would coordinate with their sanctuary's volunteer network, positioning them strategically along the route as lookouts. Keir would ensure his most trusted officers were on duty that night. Inez would monitor Pike's communications and alert them to any changes in plan. Blythe felt the weight of their risks pressing down on her. Keir was putting his career on the line. One mistake could cost him his badge and reputation. Nico was risking the sanctuary's future. If they failed, Pike's retaliation would be swift and final. And Inez, Blythe saw the fear behind her steady gaze. Pike's revenge on a betraying employee would be merciless. As the others left, Keir lingered behind. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "Once we start, there's no turning back." Blythe met his concerned look. "I keep seeing Cedar's eyes in that video," she said. "All that pain and confusion. He deserves a chance at healing, at trust." They all do. Over the next week, preparation consumed them. Blythe practiced with their transport equipment, ensuring she could handle it smoothly under pressure. Nico stocked their medical supplies and drilled their emergency protocols. Keir quietly arranged for sympathetic officers to be positioned nearby. The night before the planned interception, Blythe stood in the sanctuary's rehabilitation area. The empty enclosure waited, specially prepared for cedar-reinforced walls, elevated platforms for security, and quiet spaces where a traumatized animal could feel safe. She'd added natural enrichment items, hoping they might help him remember his instincts. Her phone buzzed, a text from Inez. "Transport confirmed for tomorrow night. 3 vehicles, Cedar in the middle truck. Be careful." Blythe's hand shook slightly as she replied. Tomorrow night, they would either save Cedar and begin exposing Pike's operation, or everything they'd worked for would crumble. She thought of all the animals still trapped at Pike's ranch, of Cedar's scarred body and haunted eyes. "We're coming," she whispered to the empty enclosure. "Just hold on one more night." The next evening, they gathered one final time to review their positions. Nico distributed burner phones, already programmed with their secure contact numbers. Keir double-checked his equipment and paperwork, ensuring everything would stand up to scrutiny. Inez provided last-minute details about the transport crew's routines and personalities. "Remember," Blythe said as they prepared to split up, "no unnecessary risks. If something feels wrong, we abort. We're no good to these animals if we're caught or hurt." They nodded solemnly, understanding the stakes. One by one, They departed to their assigned positions. Blythe watched them go, these brave people who'd chosen to stand with her despite the danger. She checked her own equipment one last time: restraints, medical kit, protective gear. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility and peril as darkness settled over the sanctuary. Blythe climbed into her vehicle. The desert night was clear and star-filled, the air cool with early spring. She thought of Cedar, likely being loaded into a transport truck at that very moment, not knowing the people were finally fighting for him. Her hand steadied on the steering wheel as she pulled out onto the road. Whatever came next, they were committed now. The time for planning was over. The time for action had come. The midnight air hung thick with tension as Blythe crouched behind her truck, watching the dark highway stretch before her. Her heart pounded against her ribs. In her earpiece, Nico's voice crackled. Transport spotted. 3 minutes out. Kier's patrol car sat hidden behind a cluster of desert scrub, its lights dark. Through her binoculars, Blythe spotted the convoy. 2 heavy trucks moving fast, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The lead vehicle carried Cedar. Ready. Kier's steady voice came through, moving to intercept. His patrol car pulled. Onto the highway, lights suddenly blazing. The convoy slowed, but instead of stopping, the lead truck accelerated. Blythe's breath caught as the massive vehicle swerved, deliberately ramming into Kier's car. The sound of crunching metal split the night. Kier, she screamed, but there was no time. The second truck was passing her position. Now or never. Blythe sprinted from cover, her boots pounding the asphalt. As the trailer passed, she grabbed the side rails and pulled herself up, muscles straining. The metal was cold under her fingers as she scrambled onto the top. Wind whipped at her clothes while she crawled toward the cage section. Inside, she could hear Cedar's angry snarls. The Leopard's golden eyes flashed in the darkness, his powerful body throwing itself against the bars. Every impact made the whole trailer shudder. Easy, easy, Blythe called softly, though her voice barely carried over the rushing wind. She pulled herself closer to the cage's padlock, fingers trembling as she worked with the bolt cutters she'd brought. I'm here to help you, Cedar. The lock finally gave way with a sharp snap. But as Blythe pulled the door open, Cedar's snarls grew more fierce. His scarred face appeared in the opening, teeth bared, ears flat against his head. All that pain and fear from months of abuse radiated from him like heat. Blythe knew force would only make things worse. Instead, she sat back, deliberately making her movements slow and calm. She kept her voice low and steady, the way she'd practiced countless times with injured animals at her sanctuary. It's okay, beautiful boy, she murmured. No one's going to hurt you anymore. From her pack, she pulled out fresh meat and carefully placed it inside a transport crate she'd brought. Cedar's nostrils flared at the scent. His snarls quieted to low growls. That's it, Blythe encouraged. You can trust me. Minutes stretched by as Cedar watched her, his tail lashing. Gradually, his aggressive posture softened. He took one hesitant step toward the crate, then another. Blythe held her breath. With surprising gentleness for such a powerful creature, Cedar stepped into the crate. Blythe secured the door with trembling hands. Only then did she notice the convoy had stopped, and flashing lights were everywhere. State police vehicles surrounded them. Officers had Pike and his men face down on the pavement. Kier was there too, a small cut on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. He helped Blythe down from the trailer, his hand steady on her waist. You did it, he said softly. We got him. Blythe watched as Pike was handcuffed and led to a patrol car, his face twisted with rage. After so many months of fighting, of being dismissed and threatened, justice finally seemed within reach. But her focus stayed on Cedar, now calm in his crate. His golden eyes met hers through the bars, and this time, there was no fear in them. "Let's get you home," she whispered to the leopard. The night air was cool on her face as she climbed into the sanctuary's transport vehicle, Cedar's crate secured safely inside. For the first time in months, hope bloomed in her chest like a desert flower after rain. The fluorescent lights of the county courthouse buzzed overhead as Blythe sat rigid on the hard wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past week's hope crumbled around her like desert sand. She watched, helpless, as Pike's expensive lawyer strode confidently through the corridor, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges," the lawyer announced in the cramped hearing room. "Key evidence from the raid has been compromised while in police custody." Blythe's stomach dropped. Beside her, Keir tensed, his jaw clenching. The surveillance footage, Cedar's medical records, even Inez's careful documentation, all of it had vanished from the evidence locker overnight. The judge cleared his throat. "Given these irregularities, I have no choice but to dismiss the case against Mr. Pike." Pike rose from his chair, adjusting his designer jacket with a smirk. His silver hair caught the light as he turned to face Blythe, triumph gleaming in his eyes. "Justice served," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Outside the courthouse, Blythe leaned against a stone pillar, trying to steady her breathing. The morning sun felt too bright, too harsh. Keir approached, his uniform suddenly seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "I checked everything myself," he said, his voice rough with frustration. The evidence was logged properly. Someone had to have. He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "But you can't prove it," Blythe finished quietly. "I'm sorry, Blythe. The system. I thought I understood how it worked. But this," Keir shook his head, defeat evident in every line of his body. Back at her sanctuary, what was left of it, Blythe walked the empty enclosures. Yellow clothes tapes still crisscrossed the gates. Cedar watched her from his temporary holding area, his golden eyes following her movements. The big cat had started to trust her, even taking food directly from her hands. Now his future hung by a thread. The phone call came that afternoon. "Ms. Warwick," the state wildlife officer's voice was coldly professional. "Given the dismissal of charges, Mr. Pike has filed for immediate return of his property, specifically the Leopard designated as asset number 473. "His name is Cedar," Blythe interrupted, her voice shaking. "And he shows clear signs of abuse. Without admissible evidence, we must proceed with the return. You have 48 hours to prepare the animal for transport." Blythe's phone clattered to the desk. Through the window, she could see Cedar pacing, his scarred coat catching the sunlight. The progress they'd made, his gradually relaxing shoulders, the way he'd started making soft chuffing sounds when she approached, all of it would be erased the moment he returned to Pike's compound. Nico found her there an hour later, still staring out the window. "We can't let this happen," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "What choice do we have?" Blythe's voice cracked. "My sanctuary shut down. The evidence is gone. Even Keir," she swallowed hard, remembering how he'd withdrawn, the weight of his own powerlessness evident in his silence, not as if summoned by her thoughts. A truck appeared at the sanctuary's gate, Pike's vehicle, dust billowing behind it. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, that same victorious smile plastered across his face. "Just came to check on my investment," he called out, walking towards Cedar's enclosure. "Need to ensure he's ready for his homecoming." Blythe's hands clenched into fists as she watched Pike approach the cage. Cedar immediately retreated to the far corner, his entire body rigid with fear. "Still got some spirit in him," Pike observed, tapping the fence with his keys. Cedar flinched at the sound. "Nothing a few more sessions won't fix." "You won't touch him," Blythe said, her voice low and dangerous. Dangerous. Pike turned to her, his smile never wavering. "Oh, I will. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's what happens when you try to fight the natural order of things, Miss Warwick. The little people, they always lose." He walked back to his truck, calling over his shoulder, "My team will be here tomorrow morning. Have him ready." As Pike's truck disappeared in a cloud of dust, Blythe sank to her knees in the dirt. Everything she'd built, everything she'd fought for, her sanctuary, her reputation, her belief in justice, lay in ruins around her. Cedar's soft whimper from his enclosure echoed her own despair. The sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would normally bring her peace. But tonight, watching Cedar huddle in his corner, Blythe felt nothing but emptiness. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Probably Nico, maybe even Keir, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. The weight of failure pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She sat there as darkness fell, the desert night growing cool around her. Cedar's eyes gleamed in the gathering darkness, reflecting her own helplessness back at her. Tomorrow morning, they would come for him. Tomorrow morning, everything she'd fought for would truly be lost. The fluorescent lights of the county courthouse buzzed overhead as Blythe sat rigid on the hard wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past week's hope crumbled around her like desert sand. She watched, helpless, as Pike's expensive lawyer strode confidently through the corridor, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges," the lawyer announced in the cramped hearing room. "Key evidence from the raid has been compromised while in police custody." Blythe's stomach dropped. Beside her, Keir tensed, his jaw clenching. The surveillance footage, Cedar's medical records, even Inez's initial testimony, all of it somehow vanished or became inadmissible. Pike stood at the defendant's table, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The judge's gavel fell, with a sharp crack that made Blythe flinch. Case dismissed without prejudice. Outside the courthouse, Pike brushed past them, pausing just long enough to murmur, "I'll be collecting Cedar by the end of the week." His words carried the weight of a death sentence. Keir slammed his hand against the courthouse wall once Pike was out of sight. "This isn't right. The evidence was logged properly. I checked it myself 3 times. Money talks," Blythe whispered, her voice hollow, "and Pike has plenty of it." That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the sanctuary, Blythe sat in her office, staring at Cedar's empty medical file. A soft knock at the door made her look up. Inez stood in the doorway, clutching a worn leather bag to her chest, her weathered face drawn with determination. "We're not done," Inez said, stepping inside and closing the door. She pulled out a thick ledger bound in black leather and a cattle prod that had seen better days. "This is what Pike doesn't know I have." Blythe leaned forward as Inez laid the items on the desk. The cattle prod bore a distinctive serial number etched into its handle, PR789, alongside Pike Ranch's logo. "The ledger has everything," Inez continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Every cub bought, every adult retired. But there's something else you need to know." She paused, glancing nervously at the window. "Remember Tom Walsh?" Blythe nodded. "Pike's old handler. The one who died in that equipment accident last year. It wasn't an accident." Inez's words fell like stones in still water. Tom was going to talk. About everything. The cubs, the abuse, the illegal trades. Pike found out. Her hand shook as she opened the ledger to a specific page. "The night before Tom's accident, Pike had me order new equipment, including this prod." She tapped the weapon on the desk. "It has a modification that makes it deliver. A lethal charge." Tom's death wasn't quick, and it wasn't painless. The revelation hit Blythe like a physical blow. She'd known Pike was cruel, but murder? Her mind flashed to Cedar, to all the other animals, to the staff who stayed silent out. Of fear. Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't live with it anymore, Inez replied, her voice cracking. And because Pike's not just going to take Cedar back, he's going to make an example of him. Of you. Of anyone who dares to stand up. To him. A knock at the door made them both jump. Keir entered, his face grim until he saw what lay on the desk. What's all this? As Inez repeated her story, Blythe watched Keir's expression shift from professional detachment to cold anger. He picked up the cattle prod, examining the serial number with his investigator's eye. This is physical evidence, he said slowly. And that ledger, but after today, we can't trust the usual channels. No, Blythe agreed, an idea forming. We need to make this so public, so undeniable, that even Pike's money can't bury it. She turned to Inez. Are you willing to go on? Record? To tell Tom's story to the media? Inez straightened her shoulders, years of fear and guilt visible in her eyes, but also a fierce determination. That's why I'm here. Tom deserves justice. Cedar deserves freedom. And Pike? She took a deep breath. Pike deserves to face what he's done. It's dangerous, Keir warned, but his tone carried support rather than discouragement. Once we start this, there's no going back. Pike will come at us with everything he has. He already has, Blythe replied, standing up. She picked up the ledger, feeling its weight, not just of paper and ink, but of lives lost and truths hidden. But this time, we're ready. This time, we have proof that can't disappear into an evidence locker. Thunder rumbled outside as the storm drew closer. In his temporary enclosure, Cedar's roar echoed across the sanctuary grounds, as if lending his voice to their cause. Blythe moved to the window, watching lightning split the darkening sky. We'll need to move fast, Keir said, already pulling out his phone. I have contacts at the state paper who've been wanting to crack Pike's operation for years. And the FBI might be interested in a murder case that crosses state lines with the animal trafficking. Inez nodded, her face pale but resolved. I have videos too. Security footage I've been copying and hiding. Dates, times, everything that matches the ledger entries. Blythe turned back to them, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about Cedar anymore. It was about Tom Walsh, about every animal that had suffered and died behind Pike's gates, about every person who'd been forced into silence. The truth had found its moment, and she would make sure it was heard. Tomorrow morning, she said firmly, we take everything public. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every dark secret Pike thought he'd buried. We make it impossible to ignore. The storm outside grew stronger, wind whipping around the sanctuary buildings. But inside Blythe's office, 3 people stood united, armed with truth and ready to face whatever came next. The real fight was just beginning. We're not done, Inez said, stepping into the office. She placed her worn leather bag on Blythe's desk with trembling hands. Pike thinks he's won, but he doesn't know what I've kept hidden all these years. From the bag, she pulled out a thick ledger bound in cracked leather and a cattle prod marked with the ranch's distinctive brand. Blythe's eyes widened as Inez spread the ledger open, revealing meticulous records of Pike's illegal breeding operation, complete with dated photographs. There's more, Inez said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Remember Marcus, the handler who died last year? Pike said it was an equipment accident, but I saw what really happened. She swallowed hard. Marcus threatened to expose the operation. The next day, he was gone. Blythe felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying Pike didn't just kill Marcus's career? He killed him. Inez's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the desk. I've lived with that knowledge for months now. I can't do it anymore. The office door opened again, and Keir stepped in, his face etched with concern. When he saw the evidence spread across the desk, his investigator's instincts kicked in. He picked up the cattle prod, examining the serial number. "This matches the marks on Cedar," he said quietly. "And these records?" He flipped through the ledger. "This is everything we need." Blythe stood up, energy coursing through her veins for the first time in days. "We need to do this differently this time. No more working in the shadows. Pikes? Power comes from keeping things quiet and controlling the narrative. A public hearing," Keir said, nodding. "With media presence. Too many eyes for evidence to conveniently disappear." Over the next few days, they transformed Blythe's office into their war room. Nico brought in a large whiteboard, mapping out their strategy with different colored markers. Names of potential witnesses filled one corner, former employees, veterinarians who had treated Pike's animals, even a few wealthy clients who had seen behind the curtain of his operation. "We need to move fast," Nico said, tapping the marker against the board. "Pike's already filing paperwork to reclaim Cedar." Blythe watched Cedar through the window, the big cat lounging in his enclosure. His golden coat had begun to regain its luster, though the scars from his abuse remained visible. She wouldn't let him go back to that hell. Keir worked his contacts in the state attorney's office, pushing for an emergency public hearing. "No more playing by Pike's rules," he declared, his previous caution replaced by fierce determination. "We're doing this in the open, where everyone can see." They worked around the clock. Inez provided detailed testimony about Pike's operation, her hands steady now as she documented years of abuse. Blythe coordinated with animal welfare organizations, building a network of support that would be impossible to ignore. But Pike wasn't idle. Anonymous threats began arriving at the sanctuary. A brick crashed through Blythe's home window one night. Keir's car was vandalized in the police parking lot. "He's scared," Blythe said during a late-night strategy session. "For the first time, he can't buy or threaten his way out of this." The hearing was set for the following week. As they prepared, more allies emerged. A local news reporter who had always suspected something was wrong at Pike's ranch. A county commissioner who had been pressured to look the other way. Even Pike's former veterinarian, finally ready to speak about what she had witnessed. Blythe stood in Cedar's enclosure, watching as the leopard approached her with growing trust. No longer did he slink along the walls or bare his teeth. Instead, he rumbled a greeting, accepting the gentle scratch she offered behind his ears. "We're going to make this right," she promised him softly. "You'll never have to be afraid again." The night before the hearing, the team gathered at Blythe's house. The atmosphere was tense but determined. Inez had brought her testimony, typed and notarized. Keir had assembled a timeline of Pike's violations, complete with photographic evidence. Nico had organized transportation for their witnesses and coordinated with security. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Blythe said, looking at each of their faces, "we've already won something important. We've shown that people can stand up to bullies like Pike. That money and influence don't always win. Tomorrow, everyone will know the truth," Inez added, her voice strong despite her evident exhaustion. As they made their final preparations, Blythe felt a calm settle over her. This wasn't just about Cedar anymore, though he remained her heart's cause. This was about every animal in Pike's care, every worker forced to participate in cruelty, every official pressured to look the other way. They had built their case carefully, learning from their previous failure. No single piece of evidence could disappear to derail them. No single witness could be silenced. They had created a web of truth that Pike couldn't escape. Keir touched her shoulder gently. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we need you strong." Blythe nodded, but she knew sleep would be elusive. Instead, she walked out to Cedar's enclosure one last time. The big cat was alert, watching her through the fence. His eyes, once filled with fear and rage, now held a quiet dignity. Whatever happened at tomorrow's hearing, She would make sure he never lost that again. As she turned to leave, she saw Pike's expensive SUV cruise slowly past the sanctuary. A reminder that their opponent wasn't finished fighting. But this time, Blythe wasn't afraid. They had truth on their side, and tomorrow, everyone would hear it. The team had transformed from a scattered group of concerned individuals into a united force for justice. They were ready for whatever the morning would bring, each person committed to their role in exposing Pike's cruelty and ensuring that Cedar and all the other animals would finally find lasting safety. The night before the hearing, an eerie stillness hung over the county evidence barn. Blythe sat in her truck across the street, watching Cedar pace in his temporary holding pen inside through the barn's wide windows. The leopard's golden coat gleamed under the security lights as he moved with restored strength, no longer the broken creature they'd rescued. A flash of movement caught her eye. Dark figures slipped between the shadows near the barn's rear entrance. Her heart jumped as she recognized Pike's distinctive silver hair in the dim light. He wasn't alone. 3 men moved with him, carrying something that glinted metallically. In the darkness, Blythe fumbled for her phone, dialing Keir with shaking fingers. "Pike's here," she whispered urgently, "at the evidence barn. He's got men with him." "I'm 5 minutes out," Keir responded, his voice tense. "Don't engage them alone, Blythe. Wait for—" A sharp crack split the night. Orange light bloomed inside the barn's windows. Smoke began curling through the gaps in the wooden siding. "They're burning it." Blythe dropped the phone, already running. "Cedar's in there." The heat hit her like a wall as she burst through the side door. Thick smoke churned near the ceiling, and flames were spreading rapidly across the hay-strewn floor. Cedar's frightened roars echoed through the building, mixed with the crack and pop of burning wood. She found him in his pen, pressing against the bars in panic as fire licked closer. The cage's padlock had been tampered with, jammed shut. Blythe yanked futilely at it, tears streaming from her smoke-stung eyes. "Hold on, Cedar." She coughed, searching desperately for something to break the lock. A splitting crack overhead made her look up just as a burning beam crashed down beside the pen, showering them both with embers. Cedar snarled, backing away from the flames. Heavy footsteps pounded behind her. "Blythe!" It was Inez, face streaked with soot. She thrust a pair of bolt cutters into Blythe's hands. "Hurry!" The lock finally gave way under their combined strength. But as they swung the gate open, another beam came down, pinning Blythe's leg beneath its burning weight. She screamed in pain as Inez tried to lift it. "Get Cedar out." Blythe gasped through the agony. "I'll follow. I'm not leaving you." Inez grabbed Cedar's lead rope with one hand while stringing at the beam with the other. The leopard hesitated at the gate, looking back at Blythe with what almost seemed like concern. Outside, they could hear shouts and the sounds of struggle. Keir had arrived, confronting Pike and his men. The crack of fists meeting flesh carried through the roar of the flames. The roof groaned ominously above them. Blythe's lungs burned with every breath as she pushed against the beam with the last of her strength. With Inez pulling and Cedar surprisingly moving to help, they finally shifted it enough for her to drag herself free. "Go," she wheezed, shoving Cedar toward the exit. The big cat bounded through the smoke, Inez guiding him with the lead rope. Blythe stumbled after them on her injured leg, barely able to see through the thickening smoke. They burst out into the cool night air seconds before the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Blythe fell to her knees, gulping in clean air as Inez secured Cedar in her truck in the parking lot. Keir had Pike pinned face down on the asphalt, blood running from both men split lips and scraped knuckles. Pike's accomplices lay groaning nearby, subdued by the newly arrived backup officers Keir had called. "You're finished," Keir growled, snapping handcuffs onto Pike's wrists. Attempted murder, arson, destruction of evidence, and this time, we've got witnesses. Pike just laughed. A harsh sound made Cedar growl from the truck. You've got nothing that'll stick. I own this county. Not anymore. Inez stepped forward, holding up her phone. I recorded everything. The whole attack. And tomorrow at the hearing, everyone will know exactly what kind of man you are. Blythe leaned against a truck, watching the flashing lights of fire trucks and police cars illuminate the scene. Cedar pressed his face against the window beside her, his breath fogging the glass. Despite her pain and exhaustion, she smiled. They were both still standing, still fighting. And tomorrow, finally, the truth would come out. Pike's smug expression cracked as he was led away. His eyes locked with Blythe's in a look of pure hatred. But she held his gaze steadily, no longer afraid. The evidence might have burned, but they had something stronger now. Witnesses, recordings, and most importantly, the unbreakable bond between a woman and the animal she'd risked everything to save. The courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of the hearing. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors as Blythe sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her leg, still healing from the fire, ached beneath its bandage. Cedar's empty transport cage sat as evidence near the jury box, a silent testament to that terrifying night. Inez's phone footage played on the courtroom screens, showing Pike's men setting the fire while he directed them. The sounds of Cedar's desperate roars filled the room, making several jurors flinch. And you witnessed Mr. Pike order the destruction of evidence. The prosecutor's voice was steady as she questioned Inez. Yes. Inez's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. He said to burn it all, the medical records, the transport documents, everything that showed how he treated those animals. He didn't care that Cedar was still inside. Pike's lawyer tried to paint Inez as a disgruntled employee, but her testimony stood firm. Years of detailed records backed her words, feeding schedules, training, sessions, and the truth about the handler's death. The most damaging testimony came from Deputy Marshall, one of Pike's longtime allies. Faced with his own criminal charges, he finally broke ranks. Pike paid us to look the other way, Marshall admitted, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Traffic stops, inspections, complaints, everything got buried. When that handler started talking about reporting him, Pike, he swallowed hard. Pike made sure he had an accident with one of the big cats. Through it all, Pike sat stone-faced at the defense table, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the prison orange he would soon wear. Only when the jury foreman stood did his mask crack, revealing a flash of fear. On the charges of animal cruelty, evidence tampering, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell of justice. Blythe felt Kier's hand slip into hers, squeezing gently. Tears rolled down her cheeks as Pike was led away in handcuffs, his empire of cruelty finally crumbling. Weeks passed. Spring brought new life to the sanctuary, which reopened with updated facilities and expanded funding. Anonymous donations had poured in after the trial made national news. Blythe walked the grounds each morning, checking on their residents, always ending at Cedar's enclosure. The morning sun painted the New Mexico hills gold as she approached his fence. Cedar had his own spacious habitat now, complete with climbing, platforms, and a deep pool. He'd been healing, both physically and emotionally. The scars from his beating would always mark his coat, but his eyes had lost their haunted look. Blythe settled into her usual spot by the fence, pulling out her worn notebook. It had become their morning ritual. She would sit and write her daily reports while Cedar went about his morning routine. Sometimes he ignored her completely, which was perfectly fine. Other times he would pace nearby, watching her with growing curiosity. This morning was different. Cedar padded over to where she sat, his movements fluid and relaxed. He studied her for a long moment, then did something unprecedented. He lay down next to the fence, just a few feet away, and rested his head on his paws. Blythe's breath caught in her throat. She stayed absolutely still, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. This wasn't just tolerance. This was trust. The distance between them might have been small, but it represented a journey of thousands of miles. Look at that. Kier's quiet voice came from behind her. He approached slowly, careful not to startle Cedar, and sat down beside her. The big cat's eyes tracked his movement but showed no sign of stress. "I never thought we'd get here," Blythe whispered, watching Cedar's steady breathing. "After everything he went through, he's not the only one who's grown stronger." Kier's hand found hers again, a gesture that had become wonderfully familiar. Since the fire, he transferred to the Wildlife Protection Division, partnering with the sanctuary to improve exotic animal oversight across the state. But more than that, he'd become her partner in all ways, supporting her vision while helping her build something even better than before. Cedar shifted slightly, stretching one massive paw toward the fence. His eyes, once filled with fear and rage, now held a calm awareness. He looked at Blythe and blinked slowly, a gesture of feline trust that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Hey, handsome," she said softly, using the gentle voice that had first reached him during the rescue. "You're safe now. We all are." The morning breeze carried the scent of desert sage and new beginnings. Cedar dozed peacefully beside them, his scarred but healing body finally at rest. Justice had been served, trust had been restored, and in this quiet moment, Blythe felt the profound truth of what they'd accomplished. They had saved more than one leopard. They had proven that courage, compassion, and unwavering determination could overcome even the deepest wounds. Cedar's journey from victim to survivor mirrored their own transformation from unlikely allies to family, bound together by the fierce love of those who choose to protect the vulnerable. The sun climbed higher, warming the fence between them. Cedar's whiskers twitched in his sleep, and Blythe smiled, knowing that while some scars would always remain, they had all found their way home. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.